Welcome to the English Language Institute of Singapore's podcast. I'm Audrey Ang. Today's episode features lead teacher Dorothy Chua giving her views to Principal Master Teacher Dr. Tay May Yin about metacognition in the teaching of writing and representing. Dorothy is lead teacher, general paper in Catholic Junior College and has taught general paper, literature in English, and English language and linguistics.
Hello, Dorothy.
Hello, Dr. Tay. I'm glad to have the chance today to share my thoughts with you. Dr. Tay, could you help us to understand what metacognition means?
To put it simply, metacognition is thinking about thinking. The GP syllabus emphasizes the importance of metacognition in GP learning. Students begin with planning their learning goals and how they intend to attain these goals. Students monitor their thought processes and adapt them as they evaluate how well they are attaining their learning goals. This metacognitive awareness improves student learning. It also increases their ability to transfer their learning to new contexts and tasks.
Yes, this is something very close to my heart. I tell my students that GP is about what's happening in the world and their lives so that they know their place in the world and their own societies. I find that my students face a number of challenges in writing and representing all forms of text. They would benefit from being guided to develop their thinking before, during, or after their writing and representation. It involves a process which includes thinking about what the question is asking for, what arguments to present, what content to use as supporting evidence, what other views there are that may not be the same as theirs, which to respond to, and how to respond to them.
Yes, this whole process involves an awareness of one's current thoughts. For example, reading, rereading, reflecting, and reviewing are metacognitive monitoring strategies. In the same way for writing, editing, drafting, idea generation, word production, revision, all these can be seen as control strategies of our own thoughts. Dorothy, what skills do you think your students need to write and represent in GP?
Writing requires thinking on the part of the student, and better writing requires more. That is, the student engages in thinking about the thinking that is involved to generate the writing. I think writing can be seen as a complex metacognitive process leading to the written product. My role is to help my students realize this, that knowing content and practicing language skills are not enough. Students need to put on their thinking caps to consider how their assumptions, motivations, attitudes, and/or interests can affect how they think about issues. They will also have to monitor the bases for their language choices in their writing and adjust their bases in response to how well these serve them.
What have you done to enable your students to be more metacognitive when writing and representing?
I have learned from you about looking at student writing for my own learning. What I value most are the 4 key questions for me to ask myself as I give my students feedback on their writing. The 4 questions are: 1. What does your student's writing tell you, the teacher, about the student's writing competencies? 2. What do you think the student is doing well in? 3. What do you think the student is struggling with? And 4. What does the student need to learn more about? And what steps do you plan to take to help the student progress? And I wish to share this with you. When you first encouraged me to examine my students' writing to deepen my own learning, I leapt into preparing for it like some of our students do for a task they enjoy. I identified students' written work as evidence of their thinking. I studied the feedback I gave my students. This helped me to reflect on discernible patterns I observed in their writing. I could then identify key learning points for myself. I also thought more deeply about the learning points I noted. That is, I thought about my own thinking. By all measures, I found myself to be a highly metacognitive and self-regulated learner.
Dorothy, you speak with such enthusiasm and conviction. Tell us, what were some specific strategies you taught your students so that they could become more metacognitive?
Well, at different stages in the writing process, we must teach our students to apply metacognitive learner strategies to regulate their writing and representing. For example, what can we do before students begin to write? We can demonstrate to them how to plan by identifying the purpose, the audience, and the context that is required by the question. We can also show our students how to analyze the requirements of a question by verbalizing aloud our analysis.
Yes, Dorothy. What you have suggested helps students to develop knowledge about the writing task. Having clarity of the purpose, audience, and context of the writing task will definitely enable students to self-monitor, check, and adapt their thought processes during the writing and representing process.
That's right, Dr. Tay. I also think it is important for us to model to our students how to pose questions to themselves prior to them handing in what they have written. Here is an example of what I did recently. My students wrote a timed practice essay. At the end of their writing, I took them through a reflection on what they had written that interwove with a review of their writing. The students reflected on and reviewed their written work for 45 minutes via guided reflection. My students told me that they found their involvement in the process and the instant feedback they received a valuable learning experience.
Indeed, this is how students can be guided to develop self-knowledge about what they need to be aware of when writing and after writing. Dorothy, is there anything else you do to enhance your students' metacognitive awareness?
Yes. After returning my students their written work, I give them time to look closely at the feedback. This is important as much teacher effort in providing feedback may be wasted if students forget or are too busy to read the feedback on their own. My students reflect on 3 areas that they have done well in. This is to boost their confidence. They also consider 2 specific steps to take to improve, and then ask 1 question they have. Finally, my students can choose to rewrite a section or the whole piece of work with my feedback in mind.
Yes, you are helping students to actively monitor their thinking in writing and representing. I think as students consciously regulate their current level of understanding, they learn to adjust when they realize what works and what does not work as they write and represent. This is so important for strengthening their metacognition in writing and representing. Thank you so much for your insights, Dorothy.
And thank you so much for having me, Dr. Tay.
Thank you for listening to this episode on metacognition in the teaching of writing, featuring Principal Master Teacher Dr. Tay May Yin and Lead Teacher Dorothy Chua. For this episode's show notes, do visit our podcast website at go.gov.sg/ELIS podcast. Thank you for listening.